My name is Sophia Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I have been searching for truth. Not the kind you read in books or hear in Sunday sermons, but the kind that shakes the foundations of everything you thought you knew. I built my career on uncovering deception, exposing lies, questioning authority, and challenging the narratives that people blindly accepted. But there was one truth I had never questioned: my own beliefs about life, faith, and purpose. From the outside, my life was everything a modern woman was supposed to aspire to. I had a successful career as an investigative journalist, a reputation for fearlessly taking on the most controversial stories, and a life that was entirely mine, free from the constraints of marriage, children, or outdated religious traditions. Independence was my badge of honor, and I wore it proudly. I was a certified feminist. I had been raised in a Christian household, taught to be obedient to God, but as I grew older, the world around me told a different story. Society convinced me that true strength meant breaking away from the old ways, rejecting submission, defining my own worth, and taking control of my destiny without relying on anyone, not even God. And I did exactly that. I built walls around my heart, convinced that I didn't need guidance or protection. I surrounded myself with people who reinforced my beliefs, women who preached empowerment but were drowning in quiet loneliness, just as I was. But I ignored the emptiness inside me. I told myself it was just the cost of ambition, the price of independence. I had no idea how wrong I was. It happened on an ordinary night, one that should have been like any other. I had spent hours working on an exposé about corruption in religious institutions, another piece that would solidify my reputation as a fearless journalist unafraid to challenge the establishment. The irony of it all, I was about to expose the deception in the church, yet I had been blind to the greatest deception of all. That night, as I sat at my desk, exhaustion settled over me like a thick fog. A dull ache spread through my chest, tight at first, then crushing. I gasped, trying to move, trying to breathe, but it was as if my body had turned to stone. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in from the edges. A single thought flashed through my mind as my body collapsed onto the floor. Is this it? Is this how my story ends? And then everything went black.
Before we dive into this incredible journey, I want to encourage you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let's create a community where we can uplift and support each other on this journey of life. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.
I expected nothingness, oblivion, maybe even a fleeting moment of awareness before my consciousness faded forever. But instead, I woke up in a place that defied logic. I was standing, not on the floor of my apartment, not in a hospital, but in an endless, formless space. The air was thick, yet weightless. Shadows and light intertwined in a way that made no sense, stretching into infinity. It wasn't silent, yet there was no sound. It wasn't dark, yet no sun shone above. Everything felt real, and yet not of this world. Panic clawed at my chest. Where am I? And then I saw him. A presence so overwhelming, so radiant that my body, or whatever I had now, collapsed to its knees. I didn't need an introduction. Deep in my soul, I knew. Jesus, his presence wasn't like the paintings or the stained glass depictions I had seen as a child. This wasn't the passive, soft-eyed figure that people imagined. He was power itself. Every part of me, every memory, every doubt, every unspoken thought was exposed beneath his gaze. I couldn't hide. I couldn't pretend. I expected judgment, condemnation. Instead, his eyes held something far worse: sorrow. Sophia, He spoke my name, but not as a stranger would. It was as if he had always known me, as if he had been watching from the moment I took my first breath. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. Not because I was silenced, but because what could I possibly say? And then he said the words that shattered everything. "You have been deceived." A chill ran through me. What?" I whispered. He extended his hand. "Come." And just like that, the world around us shifted. The weightless space dissolved, and suddenly, I was standing somewhere else, somewhere I never should have seen. A battlefield, not of earth, not of men, but of souls. The battlefield stretched beyond comprehension. It wasn't like the wars I had studied in history books, nor did it resemble the chaotic scenes I had covered in my journalism career. This was something else. A war fought beyond the physical, beyond time, beyond anything I had ever conceived. The ground beneath me wasn't dirt or stone, yet it felt solid. The sky above wasn't blue or gray, yet something loomed over us, shifting like an unseen force, pressing down on reality itself. Structures, fortresses of light and shadow, rose in the distance, pulsing as if alive, their very essence, feeding off the energy of the battle. And the battle, it was everywhere. Figures clashed in ways I couldn't fully comprehend, beings of blinding brilliance against entities of writhing darkness. The very air trembled as swords of pure fire struck against tendrils of smoke and shadow. I could feel the weight of it, the pull of something deeper than sight, deeper than thought. I turned to Jesus, my breath unsteady. "What is this?" His gaze was steady, filled with something both sorrowful and resolute. "This is the war you never knew existed." A shiver ran down my spine. "A war?" I echoed. "Between who?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand toward the battlefield. At his command, the chaos before me slowed, shifting like a veil being pulled back. That's when I saw them. Women. Not soldiers, not angels or demons. Women. Some stood resolute, their faces set with quiet determination, their eyes locked on the forces of darkness before them. They wielded weapons unlike any I had seen, not swords or shields, but something greater. Their very presence radiated a strength that repelled the darkness, pushing it back, tearing through its deceit. But others stood frozen in place, shackled by chains they couldn't see. They looked strong, powerful even, yet their movements were hesitant, their expressions uncertain. They stood in designer suits in protest crowds, behind office desks, behind podiums, faces that belonged to leaders, influencers, women who shaped nations. But their voices were silent, because something held them. "What's happening to them?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. Jesus turned to me, his expression unreadable. "They do not know they are at war." A lump formed in my throat. "But they look successful." "They are." His voice was calm but heavy with meaning. "They have built empires. They have risen in power. They have broken free from every chain the world told them to escape." I swallowed. "Then why do they look lost?" He finished for me. I nodded. He gestured again, and suddenly the battlefield shifted. The women before me, these figures of strength and power, began to change. One by one, their bodies trembled, their movements sluggish, as if weighed down by something unseen. And then I saw it. Their shackles weren't metal. They were ideas. Whispers coiled around them, invisible to their ears, yet pressing against their minds like a relentless tide. "You don't need anyone." Strength is standing alone. Submission is weakness. Love is control. Faith is oppression. each word wrapped around them, dimming their light, silencing their voices. And the most chilling part? They didn't even notice. They believed they were free. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "No," I whispered. "This isn't possible. These are strong women. They're independent, powerful." Jesus turned to me, his eyes piercing through the last remnants of my denial. "Sophia," he said, "what is strength if it leads to isolation? What is power if it separates you from truth? What is independence if it leaves you alone?" I opened my mouth, but no words came, because somewhere deep inside me, I already knew the answer. He continued, "The world told them they were breaking free, and in doing so, they built walls so high that even my voice could not reach them." A sharp pain twisted in my chest. "But they're not evil," I argued, my voice desperate. "They're not choosing darkness." "They never had to." Jesus' voice was soft, but it hit me like a thunderclap. The enemy does not always fight with fire and blood. Sometimes he fights with whispers and promises. My breath caught. Lies wrapped in freedom. Chains disguised as empowerment. A battle unseen because it had never looked like a war. A bitter taste filled my mouth. "What about the ones still fighting?" I pointed toward the women whose light had not faded. "How did they resist?" Jesus' gaze flickered toward them, and something like quiet pride filled his expression. "They never stopped listening to my voice." I frowned. "But so many have. So many don't even hear you anymore." "Yes," his voice was steady. "And that is why you are here." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he turned toward the battlefield once more. His hand lifted again, and the scene before us shifted once more. The women who had once stood frozen began to move. Not toward the light, not toward Jesus, but deeper into the darkness. Some reached for it eagerly, as if it held the answers they had long searched for. Others walked cautiously, as if sensing something was wrong but unwilling to turn back. But all of them, every single one, were stepping into something far worse than they could have imagined. Something final. Something that could not be undone. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. "Where are they going?" Jesus turned to me, his expression grave. "To the place where deception leads." I swallowed. "And where is that?" His next words chilled me to my core. "You are about to see." And just like that, the battlefield vanished. The light, the warriors, the battle, it all faded into an all-consuming darkness. A darkness so vast, so endless, it swallowed everything in its path. And at its center, I saw it. Not a prison, not a battlefield, not a fortress. Something far worse. And I knew I was not ready for what came next. The darkness swallowed everything. It was not the absence of light, but something far more sinister, a living, breathing void. It wasn't empty. It wasn't silent. It was waiting. I couldn't move. I wasn't even sure if I still had a body. There was no ground beneath me, no air to breathe. Yet somehow I still existed. I could feel my heart pounding, if I even had a heart anymore. And then, out of the abyss, it appeared. A city. At first it looked nothing like the horrors I expected. There were no flames, no wailing souls, no twisted monsters lurking in the shadows. Instead, it was beautiful. Towering skyscrapers lined the horizon, their glass windows reflecting an eerie silver glow. Streets stretched into the distance, busy with people, women mostly, Some hurried with purpose, dressed in sharp suits and designer heels, their eyes fixed straight ahead. Others laughed with each other in outdoor cafes, sipping wine, their conversations lively and confident. For a brief moment, I felt relief. This wasn't hell, but then I looked closer, and I saw it. None of them smiled with their eyes. Their laughter was hollow, their voices filled with something mechanical, like echoes of something once real. There was no warmth, no true connection, only performance. They looked free, but they were caged. A chill crawled up my spine. "Where are we?" I whispered. Jesus stood beside me, his gaze solemn. "This is the end of the path they chose." I turned, shaking my head. "No, this looks like life. This looks like success." He didn't speak. Instead, he lifted his hand once more, and just like before, the veil lifted. What I saw next made my stomach drop. The city remained the same, but the people, the women, were no longer as they appeared. Their perfect faces flickered, revealing expressions of emptiness. Their bodies moved, but their souls were gone. Their voices no longer belonged to them. Some of them clutched onto success as if it could fill the void inside them, working tirelessly, achieving more, climbing higher, never once stopping to ask why none of it ever felt like enough. Others filled their time with pleasure, drowning themselves in temporary highs, relationships without depth, entertainment without meaning, momentary distractions from an emptiness they refused to acknowledge. And some simply stood still, eyes hollow, waiting for something that would never come. My throat tightened. "They don't even realize," Jesus nodded, "because they were never told the truth." I felt a sickening pull in my stomach. "This was me," I whispered. "I was one of them." "Yes," Jesus said gently, "and you were on the path to becoming what they are now." I shook my head, stepping back. "No, this doesn't make sense. They made choices. They chose this." "No," his voice was firm. "They were led here." A rush of wind tore through the city, and for the first time I saw them, the ones who had led them here. Dark figures, shadowed but unmistakably present, moved among the women, whispering into their ears, feeding them lie after lie after lie. They were not demons in grotesque form. They didn't need to be. They looked human. Teachers, leaders, influencers, celebrities, writers, politicians, women who had, knowingly or unknowingly, carried the deception forward. They had convinced generations that independence meant isolation, that empowerment meant rejecting the divine, that to be free, one must first abandon everything that made them whole. The whispers slithered around us like living things. Love is a trap. Men are the enemy. You don't need faith. You don't need God. You don't need anyone. I wanted to scream, to shake the women who were walking blindly into an abyss disguised as paradise. "They think they're free," I choked out. "They think they're happy." Jesus nodded, because they were taught that happiness and fulfillment were the same thing. I turned to him, desperation clawing at my throat. "But if they're so empty, why don't they leave? Why don't they see?" His expression darkened, because leaving means admitting they were deceived. I felt the weight of those words press into my chest like a vice. I thought about every article I had written, every time I had praised the idea of self-sufficiency at the cost of connection, every time I had dismissed faith as an outdated relic. I had been so sure, so proud, so convinced that I was right. I swallowed hard. What happens to them? For the first time, Jesus' eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Grief. "They continue walking," he said. "Further and further. Until they reach the place where even my voice cannot reach them anymore." A lump formed in my throat. "Is there," my voice cracked, "is there no way back?" He was silent for a long moment. Some will wake up before it's too late, but many. His gaze lifted toward the horizon, toward the endless city, toward the millions who had already passed the point of no return. "Many have gone too far." A shudder ran through me. "What happens when they reach the end?" I whispered. Jesus didn't answer. Instead, he simply turned toward something in the distance. I followed his gaze, dread curling in my stomach. The silver glow of the city dimmed as the horizon stretched into something else. Something much worse. It was no longer a city, no longer a place of illusion. It was a pit, an abyss, a void that pulsed with an energy I had never felt before. Something final. And the women, they were still walking toward it. They didn't see it, didn't hesitate. They believed they were heading toward something greater, something that would finally fulfill them. But they weren't. They were marching toward the place where all deception leads. And the moment I understood that, the moment the full horror of it settled into my bones, Jesus turned back to me. "There is only one thing left for you to see." I tore my gaze from the abyss, my body trembling. "What?" His voice was gentle, but unshakable. "The moment you almost reached the end." The air around us shifted. The city, the pit, the battlefield. It all vanished. And suddenly, I was back in my own world, back in my life, back in the moment before I died. And I saw everything, every lie I had believed, every choice I had made, every whisper that had led me here. And worst of all, I saw the exact moment where, if I had not been stopped, I would have gone too far. And I knew. This was the moment that changed everything. I gasped. One moment I was watching the end of the path, the abyss that swallowed those who walked too far. The next, I was back in my life. I saw myself in my apartment, sitting at my desk, exhaustion in my eyes. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, preparing to publish another article, one that would feed the very deception I had just witnessed. I saw myself fully convinced that I was in control, that I was enlightened, that I needed nothing and no one. And then I saw the moment I was about to cross the point of no return. A choice. A single decision that, had I made it, would have set my path permanently toward the abyss. I had been moments away from sealing my fate. If I had died just a little later, if I had walked just a little further into my own deception, I never would have heard his voice. Tears filled my eyes. "I didn't know," I whispered. Jesus turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "Now you do." The weight of everything pressed down on me. I had spent my life believing a lie, pushing others to believe it too. But now I had seen the truth, the war that raged unseen, the deception that pulled souls into destruction. And I had been one of its loudest voices. I swallowed hard. What happens now? Jesus looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Go back." Before I could respond, a force pulled at me, stronger than gravity, stronger than anything I had ever known. The battlefield, the abyss, the unseen war, it all vanished. Light flooded my vision. I heard voices, beeping machines. The weight of my body returned. I was alive. I gasped for breath, my chest heaving. The doctors shouted, nurses rushed to my side, but I wasn't the same. I had seen what lay ahead, and now I had only one mission: to tell the world the truth.